this quick check problem here where we looked at identifying an equivalent units of production. So remember, we were talking about all our units passing through all the same departments. And the goal is to figure out a per unit cost in each department as opposed to job order costing, where we figured out a per unit cost per job. And so we've got units that remain in the department and some units that have transferred out. So we want to know how many units transferred out, because if they transferred out, that means they were done or completed in that department. We also need to know the number of units that remain in the department, and we need to convert those units to what we call an equivalent units of production, equivalent units completed. So I think I used the example, it was like having 2 half glasses of water. When I add both those glasses together, I get 1 complete or 1 full glass of water, right? So that's how we're looking at this. And we did this quick check together, so we'll just move on from here. Now there are a couple of ways, or a couple of approaches, I guess I'll call them, to this process. And we're only going to do one of them. It's called weighted average. So I think I mentioned this as well. We're going to assign all costs, or all units, excuse me, the same cost. So we're not going to try to make any distinction between, and I know I'd put this on the board a couple times, but just real quick here. So, we had 2 departments, and this was work in process, Department A, work in process, Department B, and we said, okay, so when all of my units, this is my in and out, so when all my units and my dollars here together, right, when they're done in this department, they come out and they go here, okay? Some units remain in Department A. So we said, we had this beginning balance, then we had to add the units, then we had units that were transferred out to the next department, and we had an ending balance here. So not all of the units that were started in this department in the month were finished. Some of them remained. So we had some beginning units, we had some transferred out, and we had an ending balance. So we had different, I'll call them layers of units. We don't try to separate those layers when we use weighted average. We assign all the units in the entire department the same cost, so that the units transferred out get assigned the same price, the units that stayed get assigned the same price. There's other alternatives to that. FIFO is one, first in, first out, so we do separate beginning balances from those units transferred out, but that's a little bit more complicated than we will get here. So if you're an accounting major or a finance major and you move on to take cost accounting, then we'll address that in cost accounting, but you don't have to worry about it now. So this is basically just the data, and I'm going to use I'm going to use there it is. I was looking for the eraser. The T accounts to kind of help us here. I'm going to use the T accounts to kind of help us along here, and we're going to talk about this information in terms of a T account, just to kind of give us a little bit of a different visual. But this is just data associated with units that have to pass through certain departments. This is just one department, so this is the assembly department. So maybe we have the cutting, the assembling, and the finishing department. This is just the assembly department, okay? So understand that units in the assembly department are eventually going to be done being assembled, and they're going to move out of there. So wherever they go, oh my goodness. Wherever they're going, not exactly sure, but maybe this is the finishing department. All right. Okay. So what we've got, and this is just units for now. So there are 2 steps to this. The first step is determining the number of units that were completed and transferred out to the next department, and the number of units that actually aren't done. Because if they're still in the department, they're not finished. All right. So let's just kind of look at what we've got down the side here. It says work in process June 1st, right? So I'm going to suggest that this is my June 1st balance, and these are units, these are not dollars. I can do it either way, but right now we're starting out with units, all right? So it says, I have 300 units is my beginning balance. Now, where did those units come from? Those were units that were started the previous month, right? Those were units that came from maybe the cutting department. I'm just making this up as I go here a little bit, but they moved into this department. That's how many units were in the assembly department as of June 1st. Throughout the month of June, more units were transferred out of this department and came into this department, right? So all of the units, they all have to pass through the same process. So the units that were started in production in June were 6,000. That means that during the month of June, we had another 6,000 units that were added to the assembly department. So in total, right, we have 6,300 units that were in the assembly department at some point in time in the month of June. Okay, follow? All right. So then it says units completed and transferred out of the department, of the assembly department. So that means if they're transferred out, remember, this is a plus, this is a minus. So transferred out means we're subtracting them out. So if they're transferred out, and it gives us that number, 5,400, where are they transferred out to? Transferred out to the finishing department, so they end up over here, right? I mean, our focus is this right here, but it's helpful to think about what comes before and what comes after. So basically, when I do the math, 6,300 minus 5,400 gives me that work in process June 30, okay, of 900. All right, now, in order to figure out my cost per unit in a department, I have to take my costs and divide it by units, right? That gives me a cost per unit, okay? What this is going to give me, this first part of this process, are my units. That's what I'm working on. So this is like a two-step process. Step one, I'll find my units. Step two, I'll find my costs, and then I'll divide, okay? All right, so you guys follow with what I got up here so far? We good? All right, that's all that tells me, that first column. So this is really just an explanation. This is just really my T account in a column form instead of a T account, but you guys know I like T accounts. So over here, let's talk about what this information represents. So we talked about in terms of, anytime we're in the work in process account, any work in process account is always a collection of these three costs: materials, labor, and overhead, right? So materials, labor, and overhead together in the cutting department create our unit. Those units move into the assembly department together. Materials, labor, and overhead all move together, all right? So, but we talked about the fact that we look at our materials, our labor, and our overhead. We look at materials separately, and then when we combine our direct materials and our manufacturing overhead, we call that conversion cost, remember? We're going to lump those together. So conversion cost is a term you might want to know for the test. Okay? So conversion costs are just my direct labor and my manufacturing overhead added together. We lump them together for this. So what that tells me is those 300 units in my assembly department, let me back up, these 300 units right here, they're telling me as of June 1st, they were 40% complete for materials. So in order for these units to be finished, we still had to add another 60% of the materials that are required for whatever these units are. And the labor and overhead was only 20% complete. Okay, that's all that tells me. That's all that means. Because we're doing weighted average, and this won't make a lot of sense to you right now, you just have to trust me. You can ignore those percentages for the June 1st balance. So anytime you see a problem like this, and we're doing weighted average, okay, the beginning inventory, I don't need this. If I was using FIFO, first in, first out, I would have to keep these units separate from other units, and I would need these percentages. But I'm lumping all of my units together and assigning the same dollar value to all of them. I don't need these percentages. So ignore them for just the June 1st balance. But I do need these percentages. Okay? So we talked about this the other day. So these ending units right here, why are they still in the assembly department? Because they're not finished being assembled, right? If they were finished, they'd have moved out with the other units. So these units right here, these are 100% completed in terms of materials, labor, and overhead. Otherwise, they wouldn't be moving on to the next stage of the process. So anytime units are transferred out, they're 100% complete. Okay? The units that remain are only partially completed. But just like my 2 half-full glasses of water, I've got to convert those units to an equivalent units of completed units. So notice we have 2 different percentages though, right? Okay? So in terms of materials and then conversion costs. So there's my direct materials and my conversion costs. According to this table here, my 900 units that are still in this department are 60% complete in terms of materials, and they're 30% complete in terms of conversion costs. Now I'm going to show you how to do this a little bit more of a formal way, but this is my T account way. So what's 900 times 60%? 9 times 6 is 54, right? It goes through your times tables, right? 9 times 6 is 54. 9 times 3 is 27, right? So what I've done is, these 900 units are 60% complete for materials. That's like having 540, 100% complete units in terms of materials. Those 900 units are 30% complete for conversion costs. It's like having 270 completed, 100% completed units in terms of conversion costs, okay? All right, now, let's see how the table looks if we do this formally. So basically, we're going to take the T account and we're going to, because remember, T accounts are just like, a tool on scrap paper that we use. So here's the format that we're actually going to use. We're going to use a table. You can get all the data right from your T account. So units completed and transferred out of the department in June. That's this number right here. Now, if they're completed and transferred out, they're done, 100% complete. Look what I wrote here. They're completed in terms of materials, labor, and overhead. So 5,400 units completed in terms of materials, 5,400 units completed in terms of conversion costs. Remember, my direct labor and my manufacturing overhead are what give me my conversion costs. We're just lumping them together, okay? So that's given, right? That's actually given in the problem. I have to work too hard to get that number. Now, my work in process, June 30, that's my ending balance. We'll address first the materials. Look, 900 times 60 is 540, right? So we put that number of units under the materials column. So therefore, I have an equivalent units of production in the department for just materials, 5,400 plus the 540, which is 5,940, okay? And then notice for conversion, and I got to list them separate. Now, if they were all the same percentage of completion, I wouldn't need two columns. I could lump my materials and conversion costs all together in one column, but because they're not the same percentage of completion, I got to address it separately. So there's my 270, right? So in terms of conversion costs, I only have 5,670 completed units, okay? Look, my goal is still this right here. This is my goal. I'm getting closer, okay? I'm finding my units. So now I have my units, 5,940 and 5,670. You with me? The second step would then to find these costs, and they're going to be given to you, and just to do the math. Okay, but before we get that far, let's just make sure we can do one of these together ourselves. These are not that hard. Just follow the format, and we'll be all right. Let's see here. Okay, and I'm going to switch over here to page 172 in my book. And we're going to do just two exercises, really, 4-2. And then we'll come back to 4-3. We didn't learn enough to do 4-3 just yet. So let's do 4-2, okay? And again, I'm going to use a T account first because I like T accounts. If you don't like T accounts, that's fine. I won't be insulted. But the reason I like T accounts is it kind of gives me all the numbers that I need before I got to do my table. So again, this is page 172. You want to follow along? And I'm just going to use this for my T account. All right, exercise 4-2. And then we'll do the table next to it. So it says Clonex Labs uses the weighted average method. That's the only method we're going to learn in here. Okay. In its process costing system, the following data are available for one department. I don't know what department it is. We can call it whatever we want. It's work in process. Department 1, let's just say, or whatever you want to call it. They don't really give us a specific name here. So it gives us, look, work in process October 1, work in process October 31. So that's the beginning and ending balances. So look, beginning balance in terms of, and this is all units, 30,000, right? And then my ending balance, right, it says is 15,000. So that would be October 1 and October 31, if you want to add dates to those. Okay, just putting down what I know so far. Just writing what I know. Because this problem's presented slightly differently than the example in the PowerPoint. Okay? It goes on to say the department started 175,000 units into production during the month and transferred out 190,000. So look, if I go back here, I added units that were started in production on the debit side, right? So I started out with 30,000 and then I added another 175. Okay, because this is a debit, this is a credit. Debits we add, credits we subtract. Okay, I added, that's how many additional units were added to that department. It goes on to say, transferred 190,000 completed units to the next department. So I don't know what that department is, department 2 in my example, I guess, right? That means that, look, transferred out. 190,000 units came out of here. Where'd they go? They went over there, right? So 30 plus 175 minus 190 just happens to be 15,000 units. You guys with me so far? Okay. Now, look at the percentages of completion. Let's see who was awake on this dreary Monday. Do I need to concern myself with the percentages of completion for the beginning units? No. Ignore 65 and 30. If you have a book, cross them out. I don't care if you cross them out. You don't need them. What we need to evaluate are the units that are remaining in my work in process department 1 account because they're not done. Well, how done are they? It tells me in the problem that they're 80% completed, right, in terms of direct materials, and in terms of conversion costs, they're 40% completed. So we need a calculator. 80% of 15,000 is what? 12,000, right. So 12,000 units are completed in terms of materials, and then 40%, since 40 is half of 80, it'd be 6,000 units, right? So 15,000 units times 80% is 12,000, right? And 15,000 times 40% is 6,000. So let's do our little table. So I got materials. And the problem tells me compute the equivalent units of production for October. Okay? So I start off by identifying the units that were completed and transferred out. Units completed and transferred out. That is given. What is that number? Which units were finished and moved out of that department? 190. Now, if those 190,000 units are leaving that department, that means that they're completed, right? 100% complete in terms of materials, labor, and overhead. So the equivalent units are the same for those. They are 100% completed. You start off with that. The only other thing we have to do is evaluate our work in process ending inventory. So work in process, and we already have our numbers. Look, I did it in my T account. So my work in process, October 31, right? I have 15,000 units. And because those units are not the same percentage of completion for both categories of costs, I have 15,000 times 80%, which we already did the number, is 12,000. And then 15,000 times 40% is 6,000. And that was the percentage for my conversion costs. So the 12,000 goes under materials, the 6,000 goes under conversion costs. When I add my columns, I get the answer I'm looking for. The question is, compute the equivalent units of production. So when I add these up, these are my equivalent units of production. Equivalent units of production, which, if you know what that means, you can start to abbreviate EUP, okay? So 190 plus 12 is 202, and 190 plus 6 is 196. Notice there's no dollar sign, because what are these? Keyword? These are units. I'm only doing step 1 here. I've got to do 2 steps to be able to calculate my per unit cost in a department. This is only step 1. Okay? Now, what you'll see with the review questions that I give you is I'll never give you one big problem where you have to do it all, because if you don't get this right, what do you think happens in step 2? You don't get step 2 right. So I have 2 separate problems. One where you just calculate the equivalent units of production, and then another problem where I actually give you the equivalent units of production. You won't have to do it, but you'll have to do step 2 because, with those numbers that I've given you. So that problem 2 doesn't rely on your correctness of problem 1. That's all. Okay? All right, so that addresses this right here. That's what we found by doing this, okay? Our goal is to find the per unit cost. So far, I just have the units. You guys with me? Ready for the next step? Now, again, if you say to yourself, well, you know what, the T account, I get this, I'm pretty comfortable, I don't need her T account, that's fine. But if you do the T account, you kind of have all the numbers for the table that you need, right? So either way, just another way of looking at it. Okay, so now what do we do with the numbers? What do we do? So keep these numbers in mind. Let's go back to the example. For this company, the equivalent units of production for materials, 5,940, conversion costs, 5,670. And again, that's just the numbers for this calculation right here. I still have to do the numerator, so that's what comes next, okay? So the next part of this is finding the cost. And there's a lot of stuff on this page, and it's not as bad as it looks. So, look, I'm just missing this right here. Okay? Basically what we're going to be looking at is we're going to be looking at taking the assembly department T account, and now instead of costs, instead of units, we're going to do costs. So same idea, all right? However, notice that we've got materials and conversion costs listed separately. And that's because we had different percentages of completion. The only thing I need on this PowerPoint is the dollar amounts, because I already addressed my units. Like, this is just repeating from the previous slides. I just need what's in blue. All right, I just need what's in blue. So what I need to do is I need to take my materials beginning inventory. Okay, so these units cost me something. Right? I had to buy those materials. That amount is $6,119. So again, if we were looking at this as just a T account for just materials. So this is assembly department, and this is a little extra work on my part up here, but I just want to show you. So this is just direct material costs, okay? And this, we have a June 1 balance, right? Those 300 units, notice it says materials, 40% complete, $6,119. All that's saying is that these 300 units cost $6,119. That's all. Drop down to the middle here, a little lower than the middle. Costs added to production in June, materials cost. So look, in June, we added another 6,000 units, right? Those units cost $118,621. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to add them, $118,621. So these units cost this much. Okay? You with me? Make sense? Okay. So we're running out of room here. Let's pretend. Now this is the this is the assembly department T account. And these are dollars, but these are conversion cost dollars. All right? So that's just materials, right? Those 300 units also cost us money in terms of labor and overhead. Conversion cost, 20% complete, $3,920, right? So these 300 units also cost me that. And then conversion costs that were added, again, these 6,000 units, this was just materials. We also added another $81,130 here. All right. Make sense? Those units required us to spend money. And what are we spending money on? Materials, labor, and overhead. So to kind of simplify this and make it look more like this, that's our formula. Look, don't panic because it's a lot of words. It's wordy. The cost per equivalent unit is equal to the cost of beginning work in process inventory plus the cost added during the period. Listen, the cost of beginning work in process inventory plus the cost added during the period, that's your numerator, divided by your equivalent units of production. We already figured that out. Our equivalent units of production in this problem were the 5,400 plus 540, that's 5,940 for materials. So now we're just plugging, right? We're just plugging numbers. I gotta do this twice though, because I have two different, so again, T account format, table format. Look, this is a total column, ignore that for right now. Materials and conversion costs. Look at my T account over there, work in process, dollar amount for direct materials, 6119 plus 118621. I did not fill in the total because I did not want to do that mental math in my head, but there it is. It's 124,740, right? That's what this is. Okay, so we spent $124,740 on just materials in that department that month. Add up the conversion costs. Look, 3920 plus 81,130 adds up to 85,050. We spent $85,050 on just labor and overhead, right? You guys with me? So the numerator are the totals, right? So here's my costs right here. The numerators are those totals, 124,740 and 85,050, which they did it right up there. I'm just kind of trying to do this side by side to this here. Divided by those equivalent units that we calculated on the previous slide. We had 5,940 units, equivalent units for materials. This is materials. And we had 5,670 equivalent units for conversion costs. So again, our goal is this formula right here, just to divide my total cost by my equivalent units of production. Okay? So the nice thing is we can kind of do all that right on the table though. So look what happens. Everybody look up here. Even though we had to do the calculations separate, because we had different percentages of completion, in the end we add them back together. So look, 124,740 divided by 5,940 is $21. So what does that mean? That means so far, with these units in this department, spent $21 on materials. Do the math with this column as well. 85,050 divided by 5,670 gives me $15. So far, I've spent $15 on labor and overhead. Collectively, direct materials plus direct labor plus manufacturing overhead gives me my total manufacturing costs. When I add those together, I have $36. So my cost per equivalent unit is 36. You got to calculate those two separate because we have different percentages of completion, but at the end you add them back together. So one unit in the assembly department costs $36. And that's all materials, labor, and overhead. With me? All right, so see how one problem depends on the other? Look at exercise 3. I mean, this can't really get much easier, I don't think. I hope not. So let's look at it. It says Superior Micro Products uses the weighted average method in its process costing system. Data for the assembly department appear below. Now, I think this is a little tricky, not tricky, but you might say, well, why are the labor and overhead columns separate when their equivalent units are the same? Some companies may separate them. Some companies may add them together. You could add them together in this problem because they are the same equivalent units of production. Since they gave it to us in 3 columns, we'll just do it in 3 columns. It's not a big deal. Okay? All right, so look. Work in process for materials, May 1st. Cost added during production. They give you the equivalent units of production. What we just did up there in exercise 2 was already done for us in exercise 3. You don't have to do it. Here's the beginning work in process for labor, cost added. Here's the equivalent units of production. All I'm doing is this right here for each of these. And if I go back to, let me jump back a slide here. Look, here's my formula for cost per equivalent unit. Cost of beginning work in process inventory plus cost added during the period divided by equivalent units of production, right? Cost of beginning work in process inventory plus the cost added during the period divided by equivalent units of production. When I flip back over to the problem, Costs of beginning work in process inventory. Work in process inventory. Costs added during production. So 18 plus 238,900 divided by 35,000. That's all you're doing in that problem. So let me have some room up here to put this down. Right? So this is exercise. This is on the same page. It's just at the bottom of the page that exercise 2 is on. Right? Just a column here. Materials, labor, and overhead. And I'm going to actually set that up just like the formula was set up. So 18,000, right? Plus 238.9 divided by 35,000 units. Okay? And you're going to find the math for me, do the math for me. Labor, 5,500 plus 80,300 divided by 33,000 units equals whatever that is. And then lastly, overhead 27,500 plus 401,500 divided by 33,000 units. Okay, you guys with me? So, you guys have calculators? You should. Anybody? First one, materials? Still writing stuff down. Ben?
For the numerator, do you put parentheses around it? So
I mean, you should know that you got to add those before you divide. Otherwise, it won't work in your calculator right. But yeah, order of operation is to do what's in the numerator first, because you should imagine parentheses around that. Yes. So add those together first, then divide. Total cost divided by units. What do you get? $7.34, right, per unit. So this is $7.34 per unit, and that's just materials, right? How about labor? Anyone with labor? 2.6, $2.60, yes. $2.60 per unit. So that's labor. So far, we spent $7.34 on 1 unit just for materials, $2.60 for a unit for labor, on 1 unit for labor, and what about overhead? $13 per unit, okay? So again, our goal is to find out what it costs to make 1 unit. Well, our costs consist of materials plus labor plus overhead. So look, we got to add these. So what is the sum of all 3 of these? $22.94. Now, look at my instructions. It says, compute the cost per equivalent unit for materials, labor, overhead, and in total. So the question wanted to know what each of these was separately and in total. So what does that mean? It means that in that department, 1 unit costs $22.94 to manufacture, whatever is happening in that department. So far, so good? Okay, well, that's kind of perfect timing. So I'm going to give you guys these review sheets, and we'll talk about the problems here before you guys go. Again, don't come to class on Wednesday with these blank. I'm not going to give you the answers. I'm not going to write all the answers on the board. You're going to write the answers on the board. So I will expect participation. Okay, so here's my recommendation. Turn to the back page. Number 7 and number 8 are exactly like exercises 4.2 and 4.3 that we just did. Since that's fresh in your mind, do those 2 problems first, right? And I know you don't have a lot of time, but even when you're working on them, set number 7 is just like exercise 4.2. Number 8 is just like exercise 4.3. Only with number 8, I don't give you 3 columns, it's just 2. I have materials and then conversion costs. The labor and overhead are lumped together in my problem. So exercise 4.2 is number 7. Exercise 4.3 is number 8. So I'd probably start there. Flip it back over. Let's just kind of get a rundown here. This goes back to chapter 2, because that's really where chapter 1 actually. Chapter 1 was all about the equation of a line. That first question is not that hard. The second one is classification, as is the third one. So we're going back to classifying cost. Remember in chapter 3, we did job order costing. I said I would never have you do a whole statement of cost of goods manufactured. I might have you do a small component of it. Question number 4 is cost of goods sold. Can you determine how to find cost of goods sold? And I wrote that on the board. That should be in your notes somewhere. Number 5 is computing the predetermined overhead rate using the equation of a line. We did exercises in chapter 3. So number 5 is chapter 3. And number 6 is chapter 3, where you had to compute the total cost on the job cost sheet. So, do I think that you'll remember how to do all these? No. Do I expect you to try by going through the problems we completed together? Yes, I do. All right? We got lots of board space in here. Wednesday is review day. You want to do well on the test? Then you work on the review sheets. You come to class, find out if you got your answers right. And that's what you focus on. Okay? Questions? All right, we'll see you guys later. Make sure you work on those for Wednesday.